Is Michigan cornerback Will Johnson the perfect fit in Raheem Morris's defense?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And guys, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day, and all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today is a mock draft Monday, where we'll be coming at you for the next 11 Mondays, breaking down various potential prospects that are mocked to the Atlanta Falcons in round 1, sometimes in rounds 2, 3, and more, and whatnot. But in addition to talking about, looking ahead to April, we'll look ahead to March and talk about potential restructures that the Falcons may do this offseason in order to get some spending money in March. We'll talk about what is a quote-unquote Jolly Green Giant offseason, sort of what's the ideal version of the Falcons offseason, at least in my eyes, and talk about sort of Kirk Cousins' fate, cut, traded, what type of draft capital we can get, and who potentially would be replacing him as the backup behind Michael Penix in 2025. But without further ado, let's jump into the mock draft Monday, where we'll be looking back at Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network's January 25th mock, where he had the Falcons taking cornerback Will Johnson out of Michigan at the 15th overall pick. And the main reason I want to talk about this mock that's now, 2+ weeks old, is because I just watched Will Johnson. Someone was talking to a Falcon fan that was talking about Will Johnson on Saturday, and he sounded like, from this person's description, that Will Johnson's the perfect fit in the Raheem Morris scheme. And so I wound up watching Will Johnson a day earlier than I initially planned. And so basically I concluded that I think he's a pretty good fit in the defense that the Falcons played this past year. Now, if you don't know anything about Will Johnson, entered this past year as one of the top prospects in the draft. I remember doing some consensus rankings back in like October, November, and he was consensus number 1 player on, some of the more prominent boards at that time. Good size, 6'2", 200 pounds. We'll see sort of what exactly his measurements are at the combine, how fast he runs. I know Daniel Jeremiah in his blurb in his top 50 talked about some people have concerns about Will Johnson's deep speed. I think that's maybe an issue for him, and I think the 40 time is going to matter in particular for him. So if he can run into 4.4s, that will be good. If he runs into 4.5s, that will be less good. So, his stock seems to be falling a little bit from where it was, 6 months ago. He was kind of, as I said, went into the season kind of a consensus top 3, top 5 prospect. Could he slide to 15? That's certainly a possibility. I think if those speed concerns, if the injury issue lingers maybe, and teams aren't necessarily happy about that. He had a turf toe injury, if I'm not mistaken, that limited him to just 6 games this past year. So maybe he's not a lock to be the top 10 pick that I think people thought he was maybe 6 months ago. Now, I don't personally have too many concerns with the athleticism. I'm confident that he's at least a B+ athlete. So that is not, to me, something that's going to really hold him back at the next level. But typically, if you're a top 10 corner, you kind of need to be somewhere on the A level from an athleticism standpoint. So we'll see what the combine tells us on that. He was in Bruce Feldman's freak list last summer, where he reportedly had a 3-cone time of 6.57, which would be the fastest 3-cone of any first-round corner, should he run that this offseason, that has been drafted in the first round since 2010, right? Patrick Peterson has the fastest at 6.58, and he did that at 219 pounds way back in 2011. But, Johnson in that Michigan scheme, they play an NFL-style defense, right? He plays a lot of off coverage, lots of zone in that defense, cover 2, cover 3, cover 6. Watching the games this past year, we talked already last week about, what Raheem likes in those corners. He likes one corner to play off, one to play press, or is freer to play press because, he doesn't always like both of those guys, one of those guys to play press. But we talked about how after the bye week last year, the Falcons asked or wanted AJ Terrell to play more press, right? We saw improvement from him and the defense when they allowed that to happen, where they weren't giving up as many easy completions. But I don't necessarily know if we're going to see Raheem fully embracing 2 press corners, just maybe 1. And so I think Johnson fits a lot as that off corner, because that's basically what he's been doing the last couple of years at Michigan. Now, the biggest knock on Johnson is arguably his biggest strength, and that's his aggressiveness, his tendency to bite on double moves, right? That's a double-edged sword that allows him to jump some throws, and he was able to jump some throws this past year, get 2 pick sixes in those 6 games that he played because of his ability to sort of jump those underneath throws, playing from that off coverage. But he also has a tendency to bite on double moves, right? You saw Roma Dunze get him on one in the national championship game. He did have a pick in that game as well. And in the 3 games I watched from this past season, there were multiple times, at least one time in each game, where his eyes, got him, he was a little too aggressive and got let a guy get behind him on double moves. So, just think of, what Drake London did to Jack Jones in that Raiders game on that sluggo route. Like sluggos, I saw multiple sluggos, which is a slant and go for those unfamiliar with the football verbiage. But, I saw multiple sluggos get Will Johnson in the 3 games I watched. So we'll see on that matter. But I think he checks a lot of the boxes that the Falcons are looking for at CB2. He's got the size, theoretically, to match up with the more physical wide receivers that AJ Terrell typically struggles to match up with. And he's also very comfortable playing that off-zone coverage. So we'll see where Will Johnson's stock is when we get to April. There's a lot of CB cornerback needy teams picking basically between 4 and 15. There are some cornerback needy teams picking in top 3, but they have other fish to fry. But so it would be interesting to sort of see all those teams that are picking between 4 and 15 that need corners passing on Will Johnson. So we'll see how it all plays out. Free agency is going to matter. Several of those teams might be able to fill their needs at the cornerback position in March, which would open the door for Johnson to slide a little bit, not to mention the combine is going to matter, right? I remember 3 years ago, we were talking about Trent McDuffie and lumping him into the same sort of tier with Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley as a potential top 10 pick. And then he got to the combine and had, T-Rex arms, and that basically killed any chance of him being a top 10 pick. And outside of a couple of bad breaks against AJ Brown, which, we will forgive all corners for bad breaks against AJ Brown. Trent McDuffie's been very good these last couple of years. But the measurements matter, right? And so when it comes to corners, it's a height, weight, speed position when it comes to draft stock. And so in the case of Will Johnson, I bring that up just because his draft stock will be very different if he runs a 4.46 versus a 4.56, later this offseason. So we'll see on that. But a lot's going to happen with Will Johnson in the Falcons draft plans between now and April. And one of the things that will happen is free agency. And they're going to need some money to spend in free agency before we get there. So let's break down all the different ways that the Falcons can restructure contracts in order to free up cap space between now and then. So as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that's going to work just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn's going to clock in, and they're going to make it easy to post your job for free and share it with your entire network and get qualified candidates all in the same place. And when you post your job, LinkedIn has a new feature that's going to help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, and you'll double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, I reached out to the Locked On Falcons insiders over the weekend because I wanted to get some Q&A questions, and they get priority. So we had submitted some on the Discord as well. And so we'll probably get to those later this week. But if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider so that you can have your questions answered on future podcast episodes, it's been a while since we've done a mailbag/Q&A episode on the podcast, probably well over 6 months since we've done one. So I felt like, it's the right time to do one. But if you want to get that priority, you can become a Locked On Falcons Insider. Hitting the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons, a 14-day free trial. Then $4.99 a month, you get access to all my film breakdowns. I'll probably be doing a film breakdown of Will Johnson later this week, as well as other top DBs in this draft class. So make sure you check that out. But our first question comes from Andy S. I'd like to know the candidates for restructuring of contracts, i.e. change salary to bonus payment or adding void years, Grady Jarrett, going into free agency next month. So the restructure candidates, and what you're talking about, Andy, is max restructures, which is where you lower your base salary to the veteran minimum, and then you convert that difference into a signing bonus that spreads over the remainder of the contract. And so the three prime candidates for that type of restructure are Jessie Bates, Chris Lindstrom, and AJ Terrell. Jessie Bates, you can lower his $22.25 million cap hit by about $6.4 million with a simple max restructure. Chris Lindstrom, he has a $22.25 million cap hit in 2025. You could potentially lower that by nearly $10 million. And then AJ Terrell, you can take his $19 million cap hit and nearly lower that by $10 million, about $9.6 million. And so in total, if you did max restructures on those three guys' deals, you would free up about $26 million in cap space. Now, the way that you guys, to further detail this, let's look at Jessie Bates' contract. He has a $14 million base salary this year. The veteran minimum is about $1.255 million. So there's a $12.745 million difference. Well, let's round up to 12.75 to make it easier. And you can take that and turn that into signing bonus that will be spread out over the remaining 2 years of his contract since he's signed through the 2026 season. So that would be about $6.37 million in each year. And so that would basically save you that same figure of $6.4 million. Now, the thing that you can do is that you can add void years as in addition to that, and so that you can spread that $12.75 million bonus money over more years, right? You're allowed to spread money to a max of 5 years in an NFL contract. So if he has 2 years left on his contract, you can add up to three void years on Jessie Bates' contract. And instead of having $6.37 million spread over 2 years, you could wind up, I think, spreading $2.55 million over 5 years. Right. And so that would get you an additional $4 million in savings in 2025. So that would actually save you north of $10 million in cap space if you were to use three void years on top of the normal sort of max restructure situation. Another player that is in the position to have his contract restructure is Jake Matthews. He has a $21.8 million cap hit. You could save around $7.1 million with a max restructure. Just like Jessie Bates, he is signed through 2026. You could take his $15.5 million base salary, lower it to the veteran minimum, save the $7.1 million in cap space. But the problem with that with Jake Matthews is you save $7.1 million this year, but you move $7.1 million to next year. That's what people refer to when you kick that can down the road. You don't get out of spending that money. You just kind of move it around. You're basically saying rather than, 14.3 or whatever the math is, we don't get out of paying that 14.3. We just kind of split it and spread it across 2 years is basically what you'll wind up doing. And the reason why you don't necessarily want to do that is because you may be in a position with Jake Matthews specifically where you may be wanting to move on from Jake Matthews after the season. We'll see how it all plays out. But certainly, if you did nothing to Jake Matthews' contract, you could cut him next year. And, you would only take on about $6.2 million in dead money. But if you do this restructure this year, then you would take on an additional $7.1 million, so about $13 million in cap space. So instead of saving $15.5 million by cutting Jake Matthews after the 2025 season, you would only save about $8.4 million after the 25 season. So it does, that sort of math. If you're in the mindset, if you're the Falcons and you're going into this season thinking this is the last year of Jake Matthews, you'll be maybe a little bit more reluctant to do a restructure on Jake Matthews. But what I think the Falcons will wind up doing is saving that $7 million that they could get from a restructure of Jake Matthews' contract and putting that in the back pocket. I don't think they'll be in a rush to do that now, but later in the offseason, if they need that to say sign the rookies or to make another move later this offseason in the summer or before the season, they need to free up some money to head into the season. I think that's when you'd probably see more likely to see AJ Matthews restructure. Now, those are the prime restructure candidates. The other guys are guys that you need to do mini extensions on if you're going to move money around because they only have 1 year left on the contract, right? This 2025 season is their last year. Those players would be Grady Jarrett, who has a $20.4 million cap hit this year, Caleb McGarry, $16.5 million, and Caden Ellis, $8.5 million. And I've touched upon a little bit about the possibility of doing restructures on the contract. And we'll look at Grady's contract to illustrate this point, right? So Grady has a $15.25 million base salary. If you lower that to veteran minimum, you'd be lowering that about $14 million, converting $14 million in bonus. And so in order to do a restructure of Grady, now you have to use those void years that Andy was talking about. And if you were to tack on, again, the max of 4 void years to be able to spread that money out across 5 years, you could save up to like over $11 million in salary cap space this year, right? But again, you'd be taking on roughly $11 million in dead money next year if you were to do that with Grady Jarrett, because he would be a free agent. And those void years don't count as part of the contract. They're just a way to move money around. That's all they really are. Grady would still be a free agent after this 2025 season. And so to me, the smartest thing that I think the Falcons could do with a player like Grady Jarrett, and similar things could happen with Caleb McGarry or Caden Ellis, but I think the Falcons should give Grady Jarrett the same treatment that the Eagles gave Fletcher Cox at the end of his year. In 2022, the Eagles cut Fletcher Cox and then re-signed him to a brand new 1-year deal. And the Falcons could do something similar, Grady, because they would save about $16 million, so even more money than sort of doing that mini extension or void year restructure. Save $16 million by cutting Grady Jarrett, and let's say you then re-sign Grady to a 1-year $16 million deal, because $16 million is what Grady's current contract is going to pay him in basically cash this year. And if that $16 million was structured as veteran minimum salary with, like a $14.75 million signing bonus, and then you still tacked on the void years to spread that bonus money, Grady would only have a cap hit of $4.2 million this year. And then coupled with the $4 million that you already have on the books for dead money from cutting him, right? You only basically be devoting $8 million of cap space to Grady Jarrett this season. So that would save you about $12 million in total. So that would get you a little bit north than the sort of restructure with the void years that I talked about earlier. Another path could be giving Grady a 1-year extension for a comparable amount, $15-16 million or whatever it is. And again, lower that 2025 base salary to the vet minimum, give Grady roughly a $15 million and then give maybe Grady a $15 million base salary in 2026, tack on 3 void years, and then you can still cut him next year, still would have to eat that $11 million in dead money, but it would at least give you the flexibility to restructure Grady again next year if you want 2026 to be the last one. And so it's the idea, instead of just cutting Grady Jarrett and then signing him to a new year, 1-year contract, it's the same basic idea, but it's basically a different path to basically getting in this mindset of we're just going to basically commit 1-year deals to Grady Jarrett to finish out his career. And so basically, if Grady wants to keep playing, then you're like, okay, Grady, we'll re-sign you to a new 1-year deal, and we'll do it again next year. And if Grady's like, I'm done in Atlanta, I want to hit free agency, I want to test the market, I want to do that, then Grady would be free to do that because his contract would be expiring every year. So I think that's the way that the Falcons should treat the Grady Jarrett situation. We'll see how they approach it. But, now that you have hopefully a better understanding, I know I threw a lot of numbers at you guys. And so I'm sure some of you guys, your eyes glazed over. But, now that you have a better idea of where the spending money is coming from, let's break down what a ideal offseason might look like and sort of how many players the Falcons can actually sign this offseason. We'll get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So now that the NFL season is over, you're worried about the NBA action. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout every basketball game. And so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on that fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. And why not start with the Hawks Magic action on Monday night, where the Hawks are 5.5-point underdogs against the Orlando Magic. So if you want to get in on action, all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com right now, and they are offering new customers $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So our Locked On Falcons Insider New Drop has a question about, what is a Jolly Green Giant offseason? And then what would be a laying a duck offseason for our beloved Atlanta Falcons? And then I have a bonus question, kind of small and random one, but obviously going to Cousins should not be on this roster. So where would Atlanta turn to in the realm of a backup? So I'm assuming by a Jolly Green Giant offseason, you're referring to sort of an ideal offseason. And without getting into specifics of players, we'll do that more as we get closer to March and see who's available and whatnot. For me, when I break down the Falcons roster, I think there are 15 roster spots that are ripe for upgrade. 7 or 8 of them could be considered starters in no particular order. That would be the number 3 wide receiver, where you could upgrade over Ray McLeod, the number 1 tight end, where if you trade Kyle Pitts, you can upgrade over that position. Nose tackle with Eddie Goldman being the starter. Edge 1, Matthew Judon, you could upgrade that spot. Linebacker 2, next to Caden Ellis, that would be Troy Anderson's spot. CB2, that would be Mike Hughes' spot. CB3, that would be D. Alford's spot. And the starting strong safety, which is Justin Simmons' spot. So those are 8 starters that you could theoretically, in my opinion, be looking to upgrade this offseason. Now, I think of those 8 spots, wide receiver 3 is probably not going to be a priority given your more pressing needs. Tight end really depends on what happens with Kyle Pitts. And you heard me argue the other day on Thursday, I believe, where I think you probably have some in-house options, at least to, at that CB3 spot, especially if you can re-sign Mike Hughes. You could have him and D. Alford and Clark Phillips and Natron Brooks all having like a 4-way competition and hoping the cream rises to the top, and you'll get better, cornerback play at that nickel cornerback spot without having to go out and get outside help. But I do feel like the other 5 spots that I named, nose tackle, edge, linebacker, CB2, and strong safety, are kind of non-negotiable. That if the Falcons don't try to upgrade those spots or don't at least add players at those spots, we're going to have, Terry, you got some explaining to do. But, those are 8 spots. What are the other 7 spots that I think are ripe for upgrade? They're all depth pieces, right? That's QB2, currently manned by Kirk Cousins. Kick returner, where Avery Williams is a free agent. The 3rd tight end, Ross Dwelly, is a free agent. Swing tackle, Storm Norton is a free agent. Swing guard, Kyle Hinton is a restricted free agent. The 6th defensive line spot, which, depending on what point in the season, was either Taquan Graham's spot or Kentavious Street spots. Both of those guys are free agents. I think you can upgrade that spot. And then the 3rd edge, behind Arnold Ebiketie and Judon and ahead of Braylon Trice, is James Smith-Williams. He's also a free agent. So those are the sort of depth spots that I think you can get better players at this offseason. Now, of course, given the limited resources that the Falcons have, 5 draft picks, and, the potential that they may only have, $15 million in cap space to start off free agency, even after all the restructures that we were talking about, it's going to be difficult to upgrade 15 spots with those limited resources. So hopefully we'll see the Falcons either, whether it's a Kyle Pitts trade or other trades, they'll be able to get, and then possibly trade backs on draft night. Hopefully they'll walk away from this 2025 draft with like 7 or more draft picks rather than the 5 that they currently have, but we'll see on that front. And if we're assuming, that they can get 3 starters in the draft, hopefully, by picking up maybe another pick or 2 in the 3rd, 4th round range. In theory, if you can get 3 starters in the draft, you can get 3 starters in free agency. If I was, again, hypothetically, without having done a deep dive on all the players available in the draft and all the players available in free agency, but this is kind of where I'm currently leaning, a week into February, probably I would lean free agency, go after the nose tackle, the nickel corner, if you choose to go in that direction, strong safety. Draft is edge, linebacker, and CB2. If you wind up trading Pitts, I'd probably draft a tight end to replace him as well. And, if you can get, 3 starters in free agency and then, sign a backup quarterback, sign a third tight end, a backup guard, hopefully another edge in free agency, to me, that feels like a quote unquote Jolly Green Giant offseason, at least one that works for me that I think is ideal. Is you're going to be able to sign 7 or more guys, new players in free agency that are going to improve your roster. And then, if you can get some of those backup spots at vet minimum deals, which we've seen this regime successfully target in the 21 and 22 off seasons when they didn't have a lot of spending money, then, this team is not new to the idea of pinching pennies. And so they've done it before, so they should be able to do it again if they need to this off season. And so that to me is kind of what I'm envisioning, kind of what an ideal off season is. It's going to take a lot of creativity, and I'm not suggesting that's an easy task to pull off, but like that's kind of where my mindset is at this point in time. New drop. Now, to me, laying a duck off season, right? If the ideal, the Jolly Green Giant off season is signing 7 new free agents, the laying the duck off season is the Falcons if they decide, okay, well, we're only going to sign like 3 guys. And we're just going to re-sign a bunch of guys on cheap deals. And that's really all we're going to do. We're not really going to make the sort of effort to really upgrade the roster in free agency in the ways that I think they should. That to me would be, trash for lack of a better term. But to answer your last question, who are the backup quarterbacks? I put this out on Blue Sky about a month ago. And for those of you that don't know, most of my, social media analysis about the Falcons will be on Blue Sky. I'm on Twitter, but I ain't trying to hang out with those folks that may or may not support a certain former fascist ideology from 1930s Germany. But the 5 names I listed on Blue Sky a month ago: Jimmy Garoppolo, played with the Rams this past year, so somewhat familiar with the offense. Case Keenum, who was a teammate of TJ Yates back in the day in Houston like a decade ago. Nick Mullins, who spent multiple years playing under Kevin O'Connell and or Kyle Shanahan, like 6 out of his 7 years have been playing in either one of those guys' offense. Mason Rudolph, who Zach Robinson trained in ahead of the 2018 draft, and Carson Wentz, who played with the Rams in 2023. So those are the sort of veteran guys that I think if you're just looking for a guy that has experience, that knows the offense, that can help Michael Penix in that QB room, those are the guys that I would imagine the Falcons could wind up signing. We'll see if other names go to the list. I'm not saying those names as like, oh man, those are great signings. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, man, these are incredible. These are needle moving type of signings. They're not. It's just like you just kind of need a body, and then we'll figure it out. That's basically what it is. So we'll see on that front. But our last question comes from Mark C, and it's about the quarterback that is going to be replaced at that backup quarterback spot. And Mark asks, what is your sense of what the Falcons will try to do with Cousins? Based on his comments the other day, it would seem he wants to be traded. I'm thinking they will have to eat most, if not all, of his contract next year. If traded, what could he bring? Certainly not a first-round pick, but maybe a third or a fourth. So poor, sweet, innocent, naive Mark. I'm sorry, Mark, but the best case scenario, I think, from a trade is a 5th-round pick, and that's based off of the precedent of the Joe Flacco trade in 2019, where the similar situation as you found in Atlanta. Baltimore drafts Lamar Jackson in the 1st round. Joe Flacco gets hurt midway through the season, loses his starting job, and immediately after that 2018 season was over, they trade him to the Denver Broncos for a 4th-round pick. I think Flacco was like 33 or 34 at the time of that trade. Arguably was coming off a better year than Kirk Cousins is coming off, so that's why I don't think you're going to get anything better than that. And so you see the parallels with Penix and Lamar and all that stuff. So, 5th-round pick would be the best case scenario for the Falcons in a Kirk Cousins trade. I think more than likely in a hypothetical world where the Falcons trade Kirk Cousins, which is very hypothetical if you ask me, you're more likely looking at a 6th or 7th-round pick. And so, 7 weeks ago when the Falcons benched Kirk Cousins, I told you guys what was going to happen. He's probably going to be a post-June 1 cut. Nothing has changed in those 7 weeks. We'll see what happens over the next 5 weeks between now and when the Falcons would be cutting Kirk Cousins around March 12th, when the league year starts. But I don't expect much to change. We'll go, we'll go more in depth on this specific issue possibly tomorrow on the podcast, because I do think it needs some further explaining on why I think that the Falcons will inevitably cut Kirk Cousins, because I know a lot of people, at least in the comments, you're like, it doesn't make any sense to cut Kirk. And it's like, it does when you understand the circumstances the Falcons are in. So that is worth exploring further. We may do that as early as tomorrow's episode to really dig a deeper dive and look at it from not just the Falcons perspective, but look at it from every other team's perspective, which is, I think, why there's such a disconnect between what the Falcons will wind up doing and what I think a lot of Falcon fans hope and want them to do, because they're only looking at it through, red and black colored glasses. So that will be something that we'll explore later on the podcast, possibly as early as tomorrow. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to do so, and check out Locked On NFL. They'll have all the reaction to the terrible coaching of the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Never would I have thought Nick Sirianni's coaching staff would outcoach Andy Reid's coaching staff, but here we are. So Locked On NFL, we'll have you covered on that. So check it out. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.